This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 65. Welcome to the 65th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. If you've been enjoying the show, I would love it if you take a moment and leave a review and a rating on iTunes. It helps the show to move up in rankings so that more people can find it. And of course, I'd like to say a special thank you to all of the listeners who've left reviews already. I do read all of the reviews, and I really appreciate you taking the time to let me know how I'm doing. And make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com and join my mailing list. This way you'll be the first to know when I release a new blog post or a new episode or any of the exciting things that are happening in the world of Fertility Friday. And so in today's episode, it's going to be a bit of a different format. Instead of interviewing a guest today, I wanted to actually talk today about xenoestrogen exposure and why you should care about that and how it can impair your fertility. And so basically, I'm going to go through 6 easy ways to reduce your xenoestrogen exposure. I remember I did a talk recently in Toronto for a group of women, and the talk that I did was on managing your fertility naturally. And so I actually had that recorded and I released that as an episode. So that's episode number 37 in case you didn't catch that. So I'll link that to the show notes page as well. But in that, when I was there in front of the group of women, I asked the group if they knew what xenoestrogens were, because I was talking about all of the different things that can disrupt your hormone cycle. And all of the women looked back at me with blank stares. They had never heard of xenoestrogens before. And it's a funny word, of course, so it's not like you hear it every day. But it is really important that we know what they are and that we know how they can impact us, especially as women, because in the world that we live in, we're just constantly bombarded with products that contain these chemicals. And unfortunately, they can interrupt the proper functioning of our endocrine system. And so it's really important to know that they're there. And that at least allows us to make some decisions in terms of what we want to use on our skin, on our bodies. So what is a xenoestrogen? So xenoestrogens are synthetic chemicals in our environment that have an estrogenic effect on our bodies. So what that means is that when we're exposed to xenoestrogens in the air, on our skin, on our bodies, on our clothes, those chemicals are absorbed into our bloodstream and they actually act like chemical messengers. And xenoestrogens are man-made chemicals, but they have similar effects to estrogens in our body. They don't have the exact effect because they're not, in fact, the same estrogens that our bodies produce, but they still have that estrogenic impact on our bodies. And so we're exposed to xenoestrogens and other endocrine disrupting chemicals everywhere. So we're exposed to them in the foods that we eat, the personal care products that we use, and even in the environmental toxins that we breathe each day. So one of the things about learning about topics like this is that you'll never be able to avoid everything. Even if you have the cleanest diet and you use the cleanest natural products, there'll always be some degree of exposure to toxins and chemicals because this is the real world that we live in and we drive cars and that's just how it is. But one of the things that we can do is reduce our toxic load. So instead of worrying about everything, just trying to figure out what's within our control and how we can actually work to improve our situation by reducing our exposure. And so, as I had alluded to, the problem with xenoestrogens is that they do disturb the delicate balance of hormones in our body. So, as we know, our menstrual cycle and our fertility is governed by a delicate flow of hormones. And so, when this flow of hormones is out of balance, then our menstrual cycle is also out of balance. And so if we continue to get exposed to way too much estrogen or estrogenic chemicals with estrogenic properties, this can cause a number of different issues, from just changing our menstrual cycle, how it expresses. Perhaps our menstrual cycle isn't as isn't regular. Perhaps the pre-ovulatory phase is super long. Perhaps we have different symptoms of even estrogen dominance. But either way, these xenoestrogens are throwing our hormones out of balance. And so one of the questions that I get most often from emails from clients is, when you go off the birth control pill and your menstrual cycle isn't looking like it's supposed to look, especially if you've just discovered the fertility awareness method, maybe through Tony Weschler's book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, or maybe you've discovered it through Katie Singer's book, So The Garden of Fertility. In those books, you have all these charts of what the menstrual cycle is supposed to look like. And often after coming off of the birth control pill, it can take several months for your cycle to rebound back to normal. It can take several months for you to ovulate at all. And so part of the focus on xenoestrogens is just to kind of help to take some of the toxic load off of your body. So it's kind of like lifting the haze so that your body can do what it needs to do. And so by removing some of these toxins, we can actually lift some of the weight of our body. So instead of our body having to, especially our livers, having to work double overtime to clear these chemicals from our bloodstream, we're lessening the load so that our liver can clearing toxins out of our bodies, as well as just regaining that hormonal balance. When our hormones are out of balance, our endocrine system can't function properly. And the endocrine system consists of glands in our bodies that secrete hormones directly into our circulatory system. And as I had mentioned, our hormones act as chemical messengers that control reproductive function, and more specifically, they control the menstrual cycle. The major endocrine glands include the pituitary, the ovaries, the thyroid, and the adrenals, just to name a few. And you can think of your endocrine system as a fully functioning, perfectly balanced system of hormones when it's operating correctly, that operate in cooperation with each other in a continuous feedback loop. And so when foreign hormones are introduced into the system, they throw off the delicate balance of hormones that regulate the menstrual cycle, and they can contribute to all kinds of problems. So they can contribute to painful periods, estrogen dominance, long menstrual cycles, so cycles that are way outside of the normal range. They can contribute to a short luteal phase. And so basically just the imbalance of your menstrual cycle. Essentially, they can contribute to fibroids because these excess estrogens have to go somewhere. And one of the characteristics of fibroids is that estrogen makes them grow because estrogen is a growth hormone. Unhealthy cervical mucus patterns, infertility, and also proliferation of breast cancer cells. And so, as most of us know, breast cancer cells are also sensitive to estrogen. And as I had mentioned, estrogen is a growth hormone. So estrogen stimulates the growth of cells, just like in the first phase of the menstrual cycle. After you menstruate, estrogen is what stimulates the endometrial lining to grow. And so it has this effect on the body. And so if we're being exposed to way too many estrogens, this can have a far-reaching effect in a number of different areas. So one of the ways that we can all work towards improving our menstrual cycle health, fertility, and overall health, hormonal health, is to reduce the load of xenoestrogens that we're exposed to on a daily basis. So I came up with 6 ways that we can start reducing our xeno exposure every day. So I don't want you to get overwhelmed, but I am going to go through a lot of different areas where you may be exposed to xenoestrogens. This is not even an exhaustive list. There's a number of other sources where estrogenic chemicals or other chemicals that disrupt our endocrine system can come into play, but at least this is one way to start. The first way that we can reduce our load of xenoestrogens or estrogenic chemicals is to actually switch to hormone-free meat and organic dairy products. I chose to list that first because that's not something that you think about. You don't think when you're eating meat at dinner time that it can be disrupting your endocrine system. I'm pretty sure that's the last thing that would ever occur to you. But unfortunately, if we're eating conventionally raised meat and dairy products, things that you find in the supermarket that aren't specifically labeled, hormone-free, antibiotic-free, that type of thing, they're often loaded with growth hormones as well as the antibiotics. And these are hormones that are administered to increase the growth of the animals so that they're bigger, our muscles are bigger, so that the animals produce more meat. And so these hormones do change the quality of the meat. In some cases, they increase milk production, for example, in cows, if they're given certain growth hormones. But the thing about these hormones is that they don't go away just because the animal is slaughtered. So these hormones remain in the animal and in the bloodstream. And then when we eat those animals, then we are also eating those hormones that were administered to the animals. Similarly, if these animals are raised in just raised in terrible conditions, too close together, too many of them in one spot, not given the proper things to eat. So, for example, cows are supposed to eat grass. So if they're given genetically modified corn or something, then they're often not the healthiest animals either. Maybe they're not even allowed outside, so they're not getting any sunlight or fresh air, etc., etc., etc. So then they get sick, and so antibiotics are also administered. And the thing about these antibiotics is they're also still present in the meat that we're eating. So you're eating this meat, it's throwing some lovely growth hormones into your body that are screwing up your endocrine system. And the antibiotic residue is also disturbing your internal gut flora. And so obviously if you eat it once, it's not going to destroy your life or anything. But if you're eating it on a regular basis, that sustained input of these external chemicals and synthetic hormones will have some effect on your endocrine function and will disrupt to some degree the proper function of your endocrine system. And so, especially for women listening who have menstrual cycle irregularities, painful periods, all of those types of things, one of the areas that can actually make a significant difference is the quality of the meat that you eat. And there's a number of reasons for that. It's not only the hormones and it's not only the antibiotics. It's also the level of inflammatory oils in the animal itself. So we could get into that even more. But let's just say that animals that are raised in confinement have higher levels of omega-6 fatty acids, and those fatty acids are linked to inflammation, and inflammation can contribute to menstrual pain. And so one of the ways that we can reduce our exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals is to avoid conventionally raised meat. And instead, trying to source local meat, trying to source hormone-free meat. Doesn't necessarily have to be organic, but at least if you're getting meat that's locally raised from a farmer that does not use hormones or antibiotics, and you know that the animals are fed what they're supposed to eat, and they're raised in a totally different way. The quality of the meat is just dramatically different. And some women will notice a difference in their menstrual cycle just from switching the meat they're eating. Okay, so the second way that we can reduce our xenoestrogen exposure is actually along the same lines by eating local and organic when possible. And this is to minimize pesticide exposure. So it kind of goes hand in hand with the hormone meat. As most of us know, conventional fruits and veggies that we get at the store are often heavily sprayed with pesticides. So especially those green leafies that we need to get so much of for our health. And not only are these pesticides potentially carcinogenic, so some of these pesticides have been linked with cancer, they're also loaded with these synthetic chemicals that act as estrogens in our body. And the pesticides on the food actually contribute to the disruption of the proper functioning of our endocrine systems. And again, it's not about eating, that piece of lettuce once, but if we're eating these foods every day, we're continually exposing our body to these chemicals, and they can build up in our bodies, and they have that cumulative effect that can really disrupt our proper endocrine function. Obviously, this can be a challenge because organic food and, organic or hormone-free meat can be really expensive. And you can always look for the clean 15, the dirty dozen, and the clean 15. And so I'll put links in this podcast episode to that. So basically the clean 15 are, the top 15 foods that have been identified that have the lowest levels of pesticide residue. So you can stick to that instead of having to buy organic. So buy the conventional foods that actually have been shown to have the lowest amount of pesticides. And then the dirty dozen are the foods that have been identified to have some of the highest levels of pesticides. So that's one way to minimize exposure without breaking the bank. And personally, if I had to choose between, if it was a financial thing and I had to choose between eating all organic produce or eating hormone-free meat, I would choose the meat because of the hormones that are added, and just because of how much can accumulate in the muscle tissue. But at the end of the day, it's not about being perfect. But the first step is to be aware. It's to be aware that there are things that can be impacting my hormones. And so the best thing to do is just to try to minimize it. And ultimately, picking one thing is a great start. So this is just to give you ideas of some of the ways that we could reduce the exposure. Okay, so the third way to reduce your xenoestrogen exposure is to really look at our beauty products. So looking at our lotions, our perfumes, nail polish, hairspray, shampoo, you name it, all of the beauty products. Every time I go to the mall, I don't know about you, but every time I go to the mall, or if I find myself around big groups of people in elevators, wherever I'm out in public, I'm always struck by how much everyone stinks. And I say that with love. And I'm not even talking about BO. I mean, there's the occasional BO, but really and truly what I'm talking about are fruity smelling lotions, perfumey stuff after shave. And the incredible thing is that I didn't always notice this. After I had my son, I actually decided when I was, preparing for him, and I went out and I did cloth diapering and stuff like that. So I went out and bought a bunch of diapers, and then I was looking online to figure out what laundry detergent I should use. And so it was around that particular point, especially because he had a touch of eczema, that I started to become more concerned about the products that I was using. So I switched to, laundry detergent with no scent, and I was using a gentle detergent for him. I basically got rid of and stopped using all of the smelly, sweet-smelling strawberry mango lotions that I had always used and loved. I stopped spraying myself with perfume because I wasn't going to spray perfume on myself and then put my baby on my skin. And so basically, I went through a household detox, and I got rid of pretty much everything in the house that would have a smell. And the interesting thing is that before I did that, I would not even notice. It wasn't even on my radar. Like, I never noticed the smell of the dishwashing liquid or the smell of the laundry detergent or anything like that. But then as soon as I got rid of it, and now my house doesn't have any scents, then there was one time that my mom was visiting, and I forgot that I had the lotion in the bathroom, my smelly mango lotion from the Body Shop. And she used it like one time, and I smelt it for the whole day. And so what strikes me is that when we use these chemicals and lovely beauty products all the time, we don't even smell it. Like, you don't even recognize it. You just don't even notice. But then as soon as you remove them, all of a sudden you realize how strong and powerful these chemicals really are. And they stop smelling good when you are away from them for a while. So this is a lot easier said than done. I mean, we're all really, we go through great pains to pick out that perfect shampoo and, that all of the different things that we use, the perfect moisturizer that we like and all those types of things. But every time you're putting those things on your skin is your largest organ. And if you're putting it on your skin, you may as well be eating it because it has the same effect. Your skin absorbs everything. And one rule of thumb that you might want to adopt is, if you wouldn't eat it, don't put it on your skin. So that can be a bit overwhelming because there's a ton of products that we use every day. And whether it's shampoo, conditioner, body wash, soap, toothpaste, deodorant, it's all, as long as it has a scent, as long as it has, certain ingredients in there, if the ingredient list has more than like 10 things in it, and if you see a bunch of, propylene glycol or methyl this or methyl that, then yeah, that it's actually it actually contains endocrine disrupting hormones. It contains chemicals that you're putting on your skin, and then they're soaked in your skin. They go in your bloodstream, and those chemicals act as estrogenic messengers in your body, and they throw off our hormonal balance. So I'm not suggesting that you pause the podcast and run through your house and get rid of everything, but it's really just to get you thinking about what you can do to restore proper hormonal balance. Now, I know a lot of you are listening because of the topic, because it's fertility, because maybe you're trying to get pregnant, maybe you recently went off the pill, maybe you're frustrated that your menstrual cycle isn't what it's supposed to be, maybe you haven't ovulated in 6 months. And so, it's obviously throwing out your shampoo isn't going to make you ovulate tomorrow. But if you really work on reducing your exposure to these things, it can have a profound impact. Give it a couple months. Don't expect a result tomorrow, but this is one way to help reduce the toxic load so that your body can really start to function properly the way that it should. So steer clear of beauty products that contain perfumes, artificial dyes, parabens, phthalates, any ingredients that you can't pronounce, that you don't recognize. And as I had mentioned, as a rule of thumb, if you wouldn't eat it, you shouldn't be putting it on your skin. So like I said, it's easier said than done. Now, some of the ways that I have done this that might be helpful for you to hear, I often, after kind of getting rid of a lot of those lotions and things like that, I keep it really, really simple in my house. I'm not going to say I have time to like make all of my products, and because I just choose not to do all that. But what I do is I use coconut oil for a lot of things, and I use it for lotion. I use it on my face. I use it all over my skin. I use it on my baby's skin. I also use shea butter, and sometimes I mix them together. That's kind of the extent of my DIY project as far as lotion goes. If anyone has ever heard of the no poo, they call it no shampoo, where you can actually shampoo your hair with a mixture of baking soda and water and rinse it, and then use an apple cider vinegar rinse. Now, I'm not suggesting this. This is obviously not for everybody, but it's amazing how clean your hair is. And anyway, so those are two of the ways that I have really gotten rid of a ton of chemicals, just the lotions and the shampoos. I have a recipe that I posted up recently on my website that for the deodorant that I use. So the deodorant I use, and it's bizarre because it actually works. Now I'll preface this by saying that for years I used Degree, and I found that Degree was unfortunately the only thing that worked for me because I always had, stinky pits. So I'm not one of those people that just doesn't smell and, I can go without using it one day. No, I have to use deodorant. And I tried a bunch of natural products, and I'd go to the store and try this and that, and nothing ever worked. And surprisingly enough, what works for me now is coconut oil and baking soda. Literally, I put a little coconut oil on my hand with a little bit of baking soda, and I rub it under my arms. And it works all day. Now, it doesn't work all day and night, so it generally wears off by the end of the day, but it works all day. And so that's what I've been using every day for probably 2 or 3 years now. And so that's just to get you thinking. Like I said, I'm not suggesting that you do these things, but what I want you to do is just to think about it. And if you could choose one beauty product that you could switch out for something that has no scent, or if you can go to your health food store or something like that and pick out, a lotion that just has 4 ingredients, none of them parabens, artificial dyes, or, artificial perfume or any of that stuff. So if there's just start to think about it and think, look in your beauty regime and think, is there one thing that I could switch out that to help to start reducing that xenoestrogen load. So I hope that gave you a few ideas. Okay, so the fourth way that you can reduce your xenoestrogen exposure, so I touched on this a little bit when I talked about the laundry detergent. So it's to clean up your household cleaning routine. And so again, this is the same idea. When you're cleaning your house and you have like 60 different, cleaners, and they all stink, they all have their various lemon fresh smell or bleach scent or whatever. When you can smell a fake fruity chemical smell, anything that you can smell, anything that has a scent, anything that has a bunch of weird ingredients that you can't pronounce, those are all xenoestrogenic chemicals. So those are chemicals that have this similar xenoestrogenic effect on your body, and they also work to increase the toxic load on your body, which means that your liver has to work harder to detoxify. Often these types of chemicals are stored in your fat cells to protect you from them because they can be so toxic. And in addition to that, they also contribute to indoor pollution, if you will. So if you've ever heard of people talk about indoor air quality and how it's often the quality of the air inside your house is often worse than the quality outside, which seems counterintuitive because then outside you have all the, gas fumes from the cars and all that stuff. But yeah, so the indoor quality of our air can actually be worse than the outdoor quality. And one of the reasons for that is because, we've got bleach going in the basement because we're bleaching our clothes, and then you spray in all this, Mr. Clean or whatever, and it's got all the scented lemon fresh stuff. And then you've got like your dishwasher going, and it's got these, again, it's always this lemon fresh. I'm picking on lemon fresh. And then you've got the like kiwi scented dish soap in the kitchen, and then you have like the floor cleaning stuff, and then you have the bathroom cleaning stuff, and it's just this toxic soup of chemicals that are not only toxic to you, but they're also exhibiting as, like an estrogenic effect on your body and your hormonal system. So yes, cleaning up your household routine, trying to find a way to simplify it, trying to find products that are not as toxic, looking in that natural food aisle for different types of products. One of the things that I've done in my house is I have lots of bottles with vinegar water laying around, in each room. And so if I'm wiping off the kitchen counter, instead of using some chemical, I just use a little vinegar water, and it cleans it, the countertops, and I use it to clean the kitchen floors. So just again, to give you an idea of how you can switch it up. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. Obviously there's certain things that are easier to clean than others. So it's easier to clean a kitchen floor with a little bit of, vinegar water or something than it is to clean the bathtub. But again, it's about reducing your exposure and, thinking about ways that you can actually reduce that toxic load. But whenever you have that clean smell, that, because I think that's one of the hard things too. It's like that emotional aspect of the cleaning. And that's actually one of the reasons why they add the scents to the products, because we have now associated those nasty chemical, fake, fresh scent smells with clean. And so, a long time ago, I went to a Norwex party. So if you've never heard of Norwex, it's like a home-based sales, like it's like Tupperware or like Stella and Dodd or something like that. You do the parties, with your girlfriends, and you come over and they show you a demonstration and then you buy stuff. Anyway, so Norwex is one of these companies that sells natural cleaning products. And the interesting thing is that they have like antimicrobial hardware. So they have say microfiber cloths that are antimicrobial in and of themselves. And so you would just wet the cloth and clean, and it actually is antimicrobial. But one of the things that I remember them talking about was that people didn't feel like it was clean, because then you're just using this cloth and you're wiping everything down, and the cloth in and of itself is antimicrobial. But then when you're done cleaning, there's no scent, and so you don't really feel like it's clean. So just something to think about. I'm not recommending Norwex, but I was using that as an example of something that where we're so used to this scent of it's not clean unless we have a clean smell. So if you fall into that category, you might want to consider what you're actually smelling, and if there's a way to switch some of those chemicals out in your house. And similarly with, like, I kind of threw the laundry detergent under the bus. Like, if you're still using blue laundry detergent with a serious smell, even just switching to the free option where you're not exposing yourself to those dyes and those types of things. Okay, so the fifth way that you can reduce your xenoestrogen exposure is to actually stop storing food and drinks in plastic containers. And so, we've heard a lot about plastics and BPA. And so this is kind of just like your friendly reminder that that the chemicals in plastic containers have that same estrogenic effect in our bodies, and they can actually be very harmful. We often hear about BPA, and they have all these containers that are BPA free, bisphenol A, and that chemical has been linked to breast cancer and other types of nasty things like that. And so one of the ways that we can reduce our exposure is whenever we're storing food, to try to not store it in plastic containers. So kind of trying to, switch out to glass containers or different types of containers. And especially if you use a microwave, not heating up your food in the microwave in plastic container, using a glass container instead. And also, if you're bringing bottled water around with you, trying to use a bottle that doesn't have the plastic or the BPA. So, maybe get a metal container or a different type of bottle. And you may also want to consider avoiding a lot of canned food, because then if you're eating the canned food, the BPA is like in the lining of it. So then they put in the hot food and they can it, and then it just soaks up the BPA, and then you eat the canned food, and so these chemicals again just absorb into our bloodstream and screw up our endocrine system. So it gets overwhelming when you go through the list, because then you're like, well, man, it's everywhere. But again, the point is not to overwhelm you. The point is to put it on your radar so that it gets you thinking of like, wow, I didn't even think about that. I ate sardines this morning or whatever. Okay, so the last suggestion that I would make, number 6, in terms of reducing xenoestrogen exposure. Now, I probably don't need to say this with my audience, with you listening today, but I'm saying it because it's a really important point. So 6 is actually to get rid of the hormonal birth control. So we often don't think of hormonal birth control as a xenoestrogen or an endocrine disrupting chemical, but that's exactly what it is. And I'm not just saying that, it actually is. That is the purpose of it. So the pill was designed to disrupt the proper functioning of our endocrine system, because that's how it makes us temporarily sterile. Now, I think the world would be a different place if we actually called a spade. So if we actually instead of calling the pill, or instead of calling it a hormonal contraceptive, if we called it an endocrine disrupting chemical, or if we called it temporary sterilization, I feel like that would be more accurate, and maybe that would highlight what it's actually doing to our bodies. So don't believe the hype. Don't believe what you've been told that the birth control pill mimics pregnancy, because I remember hearing that. The pill makes your body think it's pregnant, and that's why you're not getting pregnant. Well, that's actually not true, because pregnancy is a totally different hormonal state. So I'll do like the very small version of the bio lesson. But so in a woman's menstrual cycle, the first half of her menstrual cycle is the hormone in the first half of the menstrual cycle that dominates is estrogen. So after a woman menstruates, then in a healthy cycle, her estrogen levels increase, and it's her ovaries that are producing the estrogen. And it's natural estrogens That's plural because there's your ovaries produce several different types of natural estrogen. But so it's actually estrogens. But your estrogen level increases in the first half of the cycle, and when it gets to a certain point, it triggers ovulation. And then after ovulation, your ovaries start to produce progesterone. And so then your progesterone levels shoot up, and in a healthy menstrual cycle, your levels are balanced. Isn't that interesting how that works? And so estrogen and progesterone have totally different functions. So estrogen is that growth hormone. It causes everything to grow. And then progesterone helps the cells to mature, and it kind of tempers some of that growth. And so you need both of these hormones. And the progesterone levels are really high in the post-ovulatory phase. When a woman then gets pregnant, the progesterone levels just keep on going up, and they stay high throughout the duration of her pregnancy. And so it turns out, and estrogen levels also go up quite a bit, but during pregnancy, a woman has high levels of estrogen and progesterone. And it's a healthy, natural state where she doesn't just have a ton of estrogen making everything grow out of control. She has both estrogen and progesterone balancing each other out and ensuring that, because they need to counterbalance each other. That's how this works. So what the pill does is the pill disrupts the functioning of the endocrine system, and it floods the body with synthetic estrogens. So these are estrogenic chemicals that are not the same as the natural estrogens that our ovaries produce. And the estrogens that you get from hormonal contraceptives are administered at a significantly higher dose than our bodies would ever produce. So you're getting a fake, man-made, synthetic, estrogenic chemical at a much higher dose than you would ever produce. And that is what prevents ovulation. So you never really think, so what happens to the natural estrogens in my body and the natural progesterones in my body? And so what happens is your body is still actually producing estrogen and progesterone even when you're on the pill, but it's producing it at very, very low levels. And if you were to compare the levels of estrogen produced by a woman on the pill, they would actually look absolutely nothing like the levels that are produced when she's pregnant, because when she's pregnant, she's producing huge amounts. It's more comparative to the levels of hormone that a woman produces when she is in menopause. And so if you've ever wondered why you go on the pill and then, the libido is its own issue, but that contributes why your libido might change. So that's a contributory factor, but the libido is kind of a different issue. But also maybe why she experiences vaginal dryness and why all of a sudden she needs to use lube and why she's not getting lubricated down there when she's getting aroused. Maybe it's because she's got a hormone level of a premenopausal woman. So anyways, on that little tangent, but yes, so hormonal contraceptives or contraceptive endocrine disruptors or chemical sterilization, temporary chemical sterilization. Love the synonyms, so I'm going to use them. That is a form of a xenoestrogen. That's a form of an endocrine disrupting chemical. And so for women who are on the pill and they're wanting to know, like, how can I reduce my xenoestrogen load? One of the things you can actually do is to go off the pill. Because just by how they're designed to screw up your endocrine system. That's the point. Temporarily, albeit, but it's still, that's what their job is. That's their role. So I think that's a really important point because, a lot of women, a lot of us, especially, there's this increased consciousness of health and fitness. And so, a lot of us are trying to eat healthy. A lot of us are trying to exercise, get enough sleep and just trying to kind of be the best versions of ourselves. But for some reason with the hormonal birth control, we don't think about that. So, you're going and you're spending all this money on organic meat and you're spending all this money on organic produce, and then you're popping a birth control pill every day and not really making the connection that it's just as bad, if not worse, in terms of your endocrine health. So So since hormonal birth control is often the last thing that we think about as being an endocrine disrupting chemical, I thought I would highlight it right there in my list. So just to go through all of that, so the 6 ways to reduce your xenoestrogen exposure, or 6 categories that you can think about in terms of starting to reduce your exposure. So the first one was switching to hormone-free meat and organic dairy products. The second was to eat local and organic when possible to minimize your pesticide exposure. The third was to switch to scent-free beauty products, and especially products that are made from ingredients that you can pronounce. So staying away from products that have tons of chemicals, tons of dyes, perfumes, artificial anything basically. Switching to beauty products that you could potentially eat. Because if you're putting it on your skin, you may as well be eating it. Okay. Number 4, clean up your household cleaning routine. So really looking at the products that you use to clean your house and trying to get rid of products that have high scent and high chemical exposure. Number 5, stop storing your food and drinks in plastic containers. So looking to get rid of the plastics, or at least minimize to the best of your ability. And 6, skip the hormonal birth control and seek non-hormonal options. So I recognize that that's a complicated issue, because obviously if you go off of hormonal contraceptives, you have to use a different type of birth control if you're not trying to get pregnant. And so it can be a lot to get your mind around switching to a non-hormonal method. But I mean, the ones that come to mind first, like the condom, I don't know why condom's always lumped in with these ineffective methods when the condom is 98% effective. But obviously the condom presents its own challenge because not everyone is comfortable using condoms. So, but something to think about. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I'd love to hear what you think about xenoestrogens, whether this was surprising to you, whether you were familiar with this already, whether you've already started to, remove certain things from your own life, or whether this was totally new to you and you feel overwhelmed. I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And I would challenge you to, again, not get overwhelmed, because I did give a pretty exhaustive list. And like I said at the very beginning of the podcast, you're never going to eliminate your exposure to estrogenic chemicals altogether, because you can do everything on this list perfectly, but you still have to walk outside at some point. And there's chemicals everywhere. So the goal isn't perfection, and the goal is not to beat yourself up and to think, oh my goodness, I've been using perfume for the last 40 years. And no, that's not the point. But the point is just to really get it on your radar and to really think about, what can I do to reduce my exposure? So I would challenge you to pick one thing that you can change out of that entire list. So even if it's just your dishwashing liquid, just changing to dishwashing liquid that doesn't have the apple scent or something like that. But I would challenge you to pick one thing on that list and switch it out. See how it goes. And if you do that, let me know how it goes. So you'll find the show notes for this page at fertilityfriday.com/65. So this is episode number 65. And so I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show and actually enjoyed this format of me talking instead of me interviewing, I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed, I'd love it if you shared it with a friend who you thought would benefit from it. So do head over to the show notes page and let me know what you think. So fertilityfriday.com/65, the number 65. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S, on Twitter at Fertile Friday. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, you can head over to the Fertility Friday Facebook community. So you'll find that at fertilityfriday.com/community. And you'll be redirected to the Fertility Friday Fertility Awareness Facebook group. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you would look for it on iTunes and leave a 5-star review so that more people can find it. And make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com and join my mailing list so you'll be the first to know when I release a new blog post or an episode of the podcast or any of the other exciting things over at Fertility Friday. And if you do have an idea for a podcast episode or a guest suggestion, please send me an email at info@fertilityfriday.com. I'd love to hear from you. So I do appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune into the podcast and to listen to the show. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.